All right, awesome. So chapter 41 continues from chapter 40. These are generally believed to be pretty continuous strains of thought and conversation. Now, as we get into 41, Isaiah affirms Israel's identity as God's chosen agent of redemption among all the nations. And he confronts the falsehood of humanity's reliance on idols compared to the accuracy of God's prophets who faithfully declare his redemptive plan. Just straight from the top, listen to me in silence, O coastlands. Now, and as in chapter 40, God primarily addressed Jerusalem specifically. While it's, even under siege and the threat of the Antichrist is looming over it and they're in distress, and he's appealing to them to put their trust in God for their final deliverance. Well, now the Lord turns his conversation to the rest of the nations. He says, listen to me, nations. If you are experiencing the shaking of the tribulation and you're seeing things that are happening that are distressing you, well, let me appeal to you for a moment. Let the peoples renew their strength. He's saying, you can put your trust in me and you can renew your strength. Or another way to interpret that could also be that I see commentators go both ways. Put your trust in me and renew your strength. Or could also be muster all your might, bring all your wisdom, and let us reason together. I actually think, based on what Isaiah is going to say in later chapters, that second line of verse 1 actually is an invitation for the peoples to come to the Lord to have their strength renewed. Because that is going to be the way that Isaiah ends up kind of wrapping up this message in a later chapter. But the Lord calls the nations together. He says, let them approach, let them speak, let us draw together for judgment, really meaning let us reason together. So here in verse 2 and onward, he says, who stirred up the one from the east, whom victory meets at every step? This description that God gives here is really demonstrating his absolute authority over the nations and over history, really getting to the point of verse 4, which says, it's God. Who else has performed and done this? Who else can call the generations from the beginning? Who else has this mastery over history? Now, specifically over this little section of verses 2 through 4 and verses 5 through 7, there's some debate about the actual identity of what specifically Isaiah is referring to here. I talk a little bit more about that in the notes, but there's kind of two camps on who could this be. Who is the one from the east? The one from the east could either be an agent of negative judgment or of discipline, or it could be an agent of deliverance or a representative of the messianic promises, which a lot of commentators say would be Cyrus, an early hint that Isaiah is giving of the Cyrus promises. And I do tend to actually fall in that camp. I think that the one who is from the east in this case, in these verses, as Isaiah gets into this entire section, I think it really reinforces that this one from the east is good news. The one from the east is a representative of messianic deliverance. And in Isaiah's case, he's going to name Cyrus specifically. So we have that hint to kind of help us. But I also think it's really interesting that there's prophecies about Israel's Messiah approaching Jerusalem from the east at the time of their final deliverance. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, there you have who's performed this, who can call generations from the beginning, saying who can call generations ahead of time. But then the coastlands, the Gentile nations, even the wicked nations who are far away are afraid. They respond with fear and trembling at what's coming on the earth. And everyone helps his neighbor. They say to his brother, be strong. They reassure each other, and then they double down on their idolatry. The craftsman strengthens the goldsmith, and he who smooths with the hammer, and he who strikes the anvil, saying, it's good. And they all are strengthening their idols. It's the craftsmen who have developed these idols, and instead of turning to the Lord, these Gentile nations or the wicked nations are doubling down on their wicked purposes and their idolatry. But you, O Israel, whereas the Gentile nations, the wicked nations, are responding in fear at the Messiah's coming, no, instead, you, my servant, whom I've chosen, who I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying, you are my servant, whom I've chosen and will not cast off. Fear not, don't be afraid, for I am with you. I'm coming for you. Do not be dismayed, for I'm your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. What a cool promise that the God who stretches out the heavens like a tent is going to take them by the hand and uphold them. at the time of their deliverance. What a beautiful promise. Behold, all who are incensed against you will be put to shame. All the wicked nations who have said in their heart, we want to destroy Israel and wipe them out from the map. We looked at that in Psalm 83 last week, that all those nations that set themselves against Israel, who are incensed against you, will be put to shame and confounded. Those who strive against you will be as nothing and will perish. And you will seek those who contend with you, and you won't even be able to find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. What amazing imagery. It's I who say to you, fear not. I am the one who helps you. Isaiah continues, calling Jacob, meaning Israel, a worm. And the worm there is not necessarily understood to be a derogatory type of term, but a worm is mostly kind of like a prey creature. And the rest of the nations, the wicked nations, are treating Israel as if they are birds of prey and Israel is the worm. In fact, Isaiah is going to go on in a later chapter to describe birds of prey, but he describes Jacob as this worm, as a sort of comparatively helpless in their own strength, just kind of a nation of prey that the Lord will ultimately deliver, saying it's not in your own strength. No, comparatively, you're not going to be able to deliver yourself in that day, but I am the one who helps you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. Behold, I make you a threshing sledge. Even though you're relatively helpless, he says, I will make you a threshing sledge. Now, where have we heard that before? Obviously, from Micah. In Micah chapter 4, Micah describes the final deliverance of Israel, bringing the nations to the land, and then the Israeli soldiers being strengthened by their Messiah as a threshing sledge that just completely overwhelm their adversaries. And so, of course, that's a very parallel prophecy there with Micah chapter 4. And you shall winnow them. Now, whereas back in Isaiah 21, Isaiah called Israel the winnowed one. During the tribulation, Israel is the one who's being disciplined. Israel is being winnowed. But instead, when the deliverer comes, Israel will winnow its adversaries, and the wind will carry them away. Now, winnowing was this process of throwing grain into the air and letting things kind of separate, letting kind of the chaff separate in the wind and be blown away. So here comes Israel basically hurling the nations into the air figuratively, and God will sweep them away, and the tempest will scatter them. And you shall rejoice in the Lord, in the Holy One of Israel you shall glory. When the poor and needy seek water. Now, Isaiah begins to turn his attention to the returning refugees, the captives who were set free, who were going to return to the land, which we looked at in prior chapters as well. He says, well, when the poor and needy among them seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. He is going to supernaturally provide water and resources for them on their journey back to the land. I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on bare heights. Kind of like Egypt. Doesn't this sound like Israel coming through the wilderness and the Lord providing water from a rock? He says, I will open rivers out of bare heights and fountains in the midst of valleys. I will make the wilderness as a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water. All of that provision so that the nations will see and know and may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it. This deliverance and restoration that takes place when Israel's Messiah comes is an undeniable miracle to the nations of the earth, especially within Israel's borders, which will cause even unbelieving nations to marvel and glorify the Holy One of Israel who has done it. At this point, God directly confronts the idols of humanity, speaking directly to the idols, saying, set forth your case. Who among you is going to predict the things that are to come? Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are the gods. Do good or do harm. Do something. It's very similar to Elijah's challenge in 1 Kings 18, where Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you can call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of my God, and whoever answers by fire is God. That's 1 Kings 18. In this case, in Isaiah 41, God is challenging the idols of the earth to predict the future. He's saying, whoever can correctly predict what is to come can be the God. Go ahead, take your best shot. But behold, you are nothing, and your work is less than nothing. An abomination is he who chooses you, meaning just there's no intelligence in relying or trusting in idols. I stirred up one from the north. Now, again, Isaiah says, we're going to go ahead and predict the future. We will predict what happens in the next generation. The one that the Lord's going to stir up. Most commentators agree that the one who is stirred up in verse 25 is the same as the one who's stirred up in verse 2, which again would be Cyrus. I had thought for a moment on my initial reading of this that the one from the north and the one from the east, the rising of the sun is from the east, could be two different people. And I think that would be so interesting because the one from the north is negative. And Isaiah's generation would be Assyria. At the end of the age, it would be the Antichrist. So to say, I stirred up the Antichrist from the north and the Messiah from the east, that would be so poetic to me. But every commentator, those with much more wisdom of this passage than me, are insisting that this is one character, the one who is being stirred up in verse 2. All that to say, who declares it from the beginning that we might know, and before him that we might say, he is right? Saying, I'm predicting this ahead of time as a proof so that you'll know that the God of Israel is the real God. I was the first to say to Zion, behold, here you are, and I give to Jerusalem a herald of good news. This is early predictions of good news and hope that is to come. Humanity's idols are unable to match the insight of God's prophets. Historically, God provided many prophetic heralds of Israel's deliverance from Babylonian captivity. And so it needs to be during the captivity of the end of the age. There needs to be heralds proclaiming Israel's ultimate deliverance and covenant fulfillment. And of course, in verses 28 and 29, when the Lord looks among the idols of the nations, there's none who have wisdom. They're all a delusion. Their works are nothing. They're worthless. And so part of the reasoning for this prediction is to give hope to the captives. All of that specificity is so needed because that kind of hope is going to be needed again during the end time captivity at the end of the age. One thing that I really need to point out from chapter 41 that we would hate to miss, and I glossed over it pretty quickly earlier, is what the Lord says in verse 8, calling Israel his servant, my chosen. And the Lord calling Israel his servant, not necessarily that Israel is enslaved to God, but that Israel is God's agent. Israel is God's chosen agent of his redemptive plan for the world. The lineage through whom the Messiah will be born is not just a Messiah to Israel, but a Messiah to the world. And Israel is God's chosen agent of his redemptive plan, of his restorative purposes, of the covenant purposes that will extend through Israel across all the earth, even in the Messianic age, as the Lord places his capital in Jerusalem and his kingdom rules and reigns from there. And so for Israel to be called his servant, that's an important part of their identity. They needed to be reassured of their identity in a day when they're under threat in Isaiah's generation, and so they will need to again when they're under Antichrist threat, for prophetic messengers to say to Israel in that day, you are God's chosen servant. You are still his agent of redemption, his catalyst of global shalom and covenant fulfillment. This is still true of you. And so for Israel to have security in their identity as God's chosen agent, and for the rest of the Gentile nations to recognize that, is so important for the body of Christ worldwide. Gentile believers who claim to follow Messiah and be covenant loyalists, so to speak, need to recognize that Israel is still God's chosen servant, the agent of his redemptive plan for the rest of the nations. And we need to have an awareness of that position that they have in that plan.